How many of you saw my previous presentations either here in person or on YouTube? Okay, okay, a few of you. All right, so most of you are new to all this. Well, this is a completely different one this year than what I've done in the past. I've gone in a little different direction with things to focus on specific areas. Now, how many of you know I work with Lightworkers to, okay, all right, good. Anybody in my Lightworker program here? Stand up, just so everybody, they can see who you are. I'm going to embarrass you for a moment. Okay, yeah, a few of you are here. So these are some of the guys in the Lightworker program, and you'll be seeing them doing their thing in the near future. What I've found from working with Lightworkers and also a lot of the other work that I'm doing these days is there are certain topics that come up or certain questions that people ask me either on Facebook or just emails or things like that, issues that people are dealing with as they're transitioning from maybe a mainstream life direction to a more unconventional one. So today I want to focus, whereas in the past I focused more on the branding, marketing, and that side of things because my background is in that area, and I'll talk about a little bit of my background later on. So we're going to focus on the whole abundance topic and the money topic and the self-worth topic. These are things that I find really are obstacles that I hit up against with not only the people who are in my Lightworker program, but just people in general out there. Just the conversations and comments that we get on different things. So we're going to look at that specifically. So as we're moving into a higher vibrational consciousness, there are certain constructs that exist in this reality that we need to work with and also to move beyond. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is to understand this obstacle of self-worth and value that's really an aspect of our disconnection from source, and how to move beyond that so that we can thrive and we can do amazing things. Just, as a general thing, a conference like this costs a lot of money to put on. And if money wasn't something that was abundant enough in what I'm doing, these kind of events wouldn't happen. And all of the people that are impacted by it, including the people who present here and our YouTube videos and the plethora of other things, our school programs, all of those things would not happen if abundance was an issue. And I do find that a lot of people in the who are Lightworkers or more spiritually conscious struggle with that, and it limits their potential in this reality. So we're going to address those topics today. So we're currently in this third dimensional space. And this third dimensional space is an important space. And I think a lot of us in this conversation discount this space as we don't want to be here, we're not of this world, we just want to get the heck out of here. These are the kind of conversations I have with a lot of people every day. People all over the world, people who I work with as Lightworkers, people who are just contacting me for just general things. Majority of you guys don't want to be here, right? And quite a few have not wanted to be here since they set foot here. So it's a lifelong thing. But as I said yesterday, you came here because you wanted to, because you thought it would be exciting and it would be fun and interesting, and how amazing it would be to have this experience of density and to experience things in these physical structures. And it's a very unique thing to be here. But at the same time, there are certain rigid rules we have to follow in this reality that make our higher dimensional awarenesses struggle a lot of times. So third dimension is important. And we are now moving into this fourth dimensional space, which is an in-between space between here, and the fourth dimension is also important. But a lot of these, nowadays, everybody's talking about fifth dimension. We're in such a hurry to jump from third to fifth, we don't even consider that there may be a transition path there somewhere. We're all wanting to be in the fifth. But fifth is a little ways off, but many of you are already walking both. You're already carrying both vibrations while existing in this third dimension. As an example, when I'm doing the energy transfer, there's a 13th dimensional collective that's facilitating and in this space. So I have to coexist in both in order for that to happen. And many of you are coexisting in many dimensions while also being in this third dimension. Not everybody has that same ability, because people who are more third dimensionally grounded generally don't shift multiple dimensions, but I'm sure all of you to some degree do. So we are in this place in between the third and the fifth as we're moving into these next years ahead. And that's what we're going to spend some time focusing on. And the fifth dimension is direct connection to source. And in direct connection to source, we don't have the kind of limitations we experience in the third dimension. But it is possible to live here without those limitations, and that's what we're going to discuss one aspect of today. And there's a lot here, but I'll just talk a little bit about these topics. So some of the characteristics of the fifth dimension. Now, where am I coming up with this stuff? Well, I'm coming up with this because I have conversations all throughout the week with Lightworkers, and I'm surrounded by amazing, talented, gifted people, and people I've interviewed on my shows and through channeling and whatnot. These are some of the things that I've realized are coming in the fifth dimensional awareness. And in fifth dimension, most of us in a spiritual conversation think we're going to lift into the ethers and we're not going to have bodies. And well, we are still going to have bodies, but they're going to be a lighter, higher vibrational physical body. So it's still going to be physical from our awareness when we get to a fifth dimension, or whoever happens to be experiencing human experience in the fifth dimension is still going to have a physical structure in order to experience. But the difference is that it's going to be a less dense physical body. So it's not going to have the same limitations of this one. And fifth dimensional physical bodies will be able to change their structure more easily, meaning that how you physically look now, you can change on demand in a fifth dimensional physical body. So that's one of the different characteristics that'll come about. Now, we're going to talk about the fourth dimension in a minute and what that is going to entail. There's still going to be a means of exchange of some sort between people. It's not going to be money like we think of today, but everybody is going to be more equal and have equal access to that. Because source does not discriminate, source does not limit. But in the third dimension, those things are limited. And so, for example, not everybody has the same amount of money, and a lot of people struggle financially where others thrive. That's more of a third dimensional construct. It's not really a fifth dimensional, but there's always going to be energy exchange between people and between different kinds of consciousnesses in any reality, and more of a heart-centered world, which absolutely is necessary for that. Many of the wars that we fight and so on are because of money. They're not really about having to protect ourselves. So when we have a more equal system where everybody is abundant, you don't have those kinds of things or the kind of experiences of hostility and wars between people. And people do possess abilities far advanced in the majority. Telepathy, telekinesis. I'm seeing these things coming into being now with individuals who are, like you guys, a little bit more ahead of the curve. And as we move to fifth dimension, eventually, this is just going to be part of the norm. Everybody's going to have these extrasensory abilities, and probably more than one. And time's not a limiting construct of our reality, where right now, if you want to manifest something, we are still somewhat burdened by having to deal with time in this reality. And time is something that moves slowly at the moment. And in this fifth dimensional reality, there's no matriarchal or patriarchal society. It is a neither. Not equal. There's a difference between having an equal society where it's both and a society where it's neither. And the fifth dimension is going to be neither. Not that, there will still be male and female genders, but there will not be a dominance of either or in that society. Gender irrelevance and neutrality also, meaning there'll still be genders, but there'll be neutrality in genders. It's going to be a non-topic. And I use the explanation of how, and I'll talk about this later, how money should be more like the air you breathe, non-resistant, non-thought-provoking, just something that's there that happens. Well, Gender neutrality is the same thing. Anytime you have neutrality in anything, there's no resistance to that thing. Our modern day society, there's an immense amount of resistance around sexuality and genders and things like that. When you have that kind of resistance, it causes those things to not flow very smoothly. So in fifth dimension, there are genders, but they don't have any sort of a conversation. It's just something that is there. And lifespans are not affected by time, meaning people can live an indefinite amount of time if they choose to or not choose to. So some will choose to live short lifetimes and others will choose to live longer, and it'll just be in alignment with their journey. Now, how I know a lot of these things are going to be in a fifth dimension, well, first of all, let me back up. We can't possibly comprehend what a fifth dimensional space will be like while standing in a third to fourth dimensional space, because the conversation or even the language that needs to be used to comprehend a fifth dimension doesn't exist in this reality. Now, there are some of us who have access to higher dimensions who may have a comprehension, but it's sort of like my earlier graphic where I had the two fish in the water and then the water line and then the clouds in the sky. The two fish in the water are sort of like us in the third dimension right now. The water line is the surface of the water. Those two fish have no idea what it's like to fly in the clouds. And if the clouds are the fifth dimension, they don't possess that understanding or knowledge. And even if somebody told them this is what it's like to fly up in the sky, they have no comprehension for what that reality is like. So that's kind of like where we are now. So much of this is just an intellectualization of these concepts. When we get there as a collective, it's going to be different in just that our understanding of that reality will be different at that time. But much of this, I think, is going to be true, and I'm collecting this from what's happening in the world now and channeled works and things of that nature. So in the fourth dimension, connection to source increases from where it is now, and not quite to where it is in the fifth dimension, but becomes more smooth and flowing. And I'm starting to see this happening in a trickle right now. So we're not quite there yet, but we're starting to get there. This is the majority of people I hear from throughout any given week or who I work with very closely are these individuals who are starting to, and many of you, I'm sure, have significant spiritual experiences and having your spiritual gifts start to manifest and show up, or even, take Darren, for example. I'm going to put him on the spot. I mean, he was here in the audience last year, and he's a dentist. So, right? And he's got, that should tell you right there, right? And he's living this extraordinary new experience, which for him is just hard to comprehend, right? And this is happening to so many people. And I have the opportunity to speak with and work with these people. So I'm seeing this starting to happen in bigger and bigger and bigger groups of people, and it's happening more and more often. So this fourth dimensional space we're just now heading into is going to increase and accelerate with more of that happening. And not just people like you guys in this audience who maybe some of you have been exposed to this for a long time, but people like me who come from mainstream backgrounds who never, well, I imagined I would probably be doing something like this in my life at a certain point, but it was hard to comprehend at that point that this is what it would look like. So we are seeing that happen, and many of the people who have attended our expos over the years are those who are walking very mainstream paths. A decentralized financial system, which is already starting to happen again. So we are at the very beginning of a fourth dimensional space right now, and these are things that are coming about. And I'll explain more detail what that is. Money becomes less tangible and physical, and I'll expand on that idea, because as we go forward into the future, money is source, or it's one way source shows up in our reality. And source does not have to have physicality, but in the third dimension it does. So we carry around hunks of gold or pieces of paper in our pockets that have physicality in the past. And so money has had that physicality, but as it goes forward into the future, it's going to become less and less physical. until eventually it just becomes our understanding of source exchange between people and between different kinds of consciousnesses. And it'll be more pure in that expression. And as it goes that direction, it's going to become more fair and more equal. So we are going to see that, and we're already seeing that. And people will gain power over institutions and governments, where right now that's not the case, but that is also happening. So what I have up here in this fourth dimensional slide are things that actually are occurring now. They're not things that are pie in the sky. I'm sort of a left brain guy, so I need to see these things. So these are things we'll expand on a bit. Matriarchal movement begins to challenge the patriarchal. You can see that already. Marianne Williamson's running for president. I mean, we're starting to see a lot of strong female figures stepping up and standing up against the system and the male patriarchy. That's what we're going to see in the fourth dimension, is the matriarchal part will start to become equal to the patriarchal, but not neutral. That's a different idea. And technology will serve the people. Time will speed up. Now, many of you have experienced time speeding up in the recent decades. It's going to really speed up in the 2020s to 2040s. And as time speeds up, manifestation speeds up as well. And this is where we're getting eventually to a fifth dimensional space where manifestation is instantaneous, because time is not a factor as much in the fifth dimension as in the third. As we're moving from the third to the fifth, time's going to speed up more and more and more. And that way, in doing that, the space between thought and manifestation will become shorter and shorter. And this is already starting to happen, and I'll give you some examples later on of how that's happening. Basic needs are met, so work becomes a recreation or mission. That's already starting to happen. And I'll explain some of the ways that's occurring, where people will not have to work to pay their bills and to make money to live. Those needs will be provided for. And then you can work if you want, do something you love, change the world, or do nothing. And that's an ability that Source provides for you, but you've been raised in a society that's convinced you otherwise. And so you've put these limitations on your experience and not allowed for that to occur. But that is a reality, and in the fourth dimensional space, we are going to see that, and those ideas are already starting to manifest. And so once basic needs are met, what else is left? If you don't have to work to make money and live, and you've got everything you need, then what's left for society to do is to work on human potential, whether that's expanding consciousness, or whether that's extending lifespan or health, or whatever the case may be. It'll be focused more on how can we become better human beings, how can we do bigger things with what we came here to experience. And of course, we are going to see, and already are, conventional medicine merging with vibrational medicine. It's already happening. Many of the people who are in my Lightworker program are starting to do that already, and even who have spoken here in previous years. And so lifespan will increase, already happening. Many technologies and tools out there already for that. And gender ambiguity is also happening as we're in this fourth dimensional space, where people are really confused about their gender, or experimenting with things that they're just not certain about right now. So there's this ambiguity, this confusion and uncertainty about gender that's going to happen in this fourth dimensional space as we get to a fifth dimension where there is neutrality. And the sharing economy, which is already happening with things like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, where more and more companies are not providing services for people, but people are providing services and products for people, and that sharing economy is going to increase. It's still a little bit centralized, but that's also happening in the fourth dimension. And then fully autonomous technologies that will serve the collective, and that's, as an example, which I'm jumping a little ahead here, I'm sure any of you not familiar with Tesla Motors, right? Yeah, anybody not? No, okay. So Tesla Motors makes electric cars. Next year, they'll have fully autonomous electric cars on the road. Meaning, and already they are pretty close to that, so a lot of drivers have been spotted asleep behind their steering wheel and their cars driving along the highway just fine. So in a year, we're going to have self-driving cars on the road. And in another year or two after that, cars without steering wheels. So we are going to have fully autonomous cars. But to take it to the next level, companies like Tesla are introducing a cab service. So you can buy a Tesla. Right now they're saying about $30,000 or $40,000. And you can put that Tesla in your driveway and lease it to their cab service. And the car will just leave your driveway and drive people around all day and night long and bring in cab fare for you. You don't have to work. And it'll come back at the end of the day and park in your driveway. And they estimate this $40,000 investment will bring you about $30,000 per year in sales and revenue. And the car will run about 10 years before any maintenance is necessary. So this is one of the ways that as we move into the fourth dimensional space where money will be something that happens in the background, where people will have more and more opportunities to have abundance in their life without actually having to physically work. But there are other systems too that are like universal basic income and things like that that are being proposed right now. So the third dimension, there's considerable resistance to source. Now I see that in not only the ways there's resistance in society, but also a lot of people's attitudes about money and so on. People, especially in spiritual conversations, have an immense amount of resistance to source. And I would say most of you would disagree with me, but that's been my observation. And the reason is because many of us think money is an evil thing, or money is a bad thing, or people who have money must be evil because they have so much money. But money is neutral. Money is like air. It does not think. It does not feel for itself. It's simply one way that source expresses itself in this reality. If you lived in an indigenous tribe in the middle of nowhere that's never been touched by money, they may exchange furs or shells or something else. And to them, that's their means of using something and basically quantifying source into this reality and saying, this thing is worth X amount of source. And if I give it to you, now you have received that. It's a very limiting way of dealing with it, but in this third dimensional reality, this is how the structure has been, as we have very limited perspective of it. And these are some of the things that manifest in the third dimension. So these are things that we are experiencing now and have been in the past. Collective consciousness is low, expanding. Human beings are beginning to manifest spiritual abilities and moving away from mainstream. Financial system is very centralized, meaning there are governments and central banks and institutions that control our own monetary system. So we have them as sort of faucets or limitations or resistance between us and source. If we had full connection to source, we would have full abundance for anything and everything we want whenever we want it. There would be no need to have restrictions. But if any of you wanted to buy a house, you have to go to a bank to ask for money, and they may say your credit's not good enough, so you can't have it, or you've already borrowed too much. Well, source doesn't have limitations. Source doesn't tell you you can't have what you want because your credit's not good. But this is a construct of this third dimensional reality that causes resistance between us and source. So imagine it as sort of a barrier that filters through only what this resistance will allow to come through. And this is why we're living in this society where things are very limited and restrictive. And financial system is centralized and ruled by a few through central banks, taxes, and things of that nature. And wars, are obviously very prevalent too, and governments have become larger and less freedom, and many are slaves of technology. I mean, most people these days can't put their phone down because of Facebook or some social media platform. So, and these platforms are collecting data and using it for their own benefit, and so we are very much becoming slaves as a society to technology, and time is limited in manifestation. And most people today work for money because they have to and are very much attached to money. And I would say Majority of people would disagree with me and say, well, I'm not attached to money. But I would say a way to look at that is, if money flows in and out of your life and you give no thought to whether it's coming or going, or whether you have enough or you don't, and you're able to do whatever kind of thing you want to do in your life, and there are no limitations to your human experience, then you're not attached to money. So there are many people out there who are billionaires who are less attached to money than the majority of people that I've seen in the spiritual arena. Because some billionaires out there are very much attached to money. But there are a lot of people out there who have a lot, and some who have very little, and who have no attachment whatsoever. You could be living in a cave in India and want for nothing. People bring you food, or maybe you're sun gazed and you don't eat food at all, and you desire for nothing, and you have no attachment to money. So the attachment shows up when there is a resistance or a suffering that comes from that experience. When you breathe the air in this room, you're not suffering. You're not thinking about the person sitting next to you sucking the air out of the room, and what if there isn't enough air for you? And you're not thinking about whether or not there's going to be enough air for you to breathe the next breath, so you better inhale a lot and hold on to it. You're just breathing without thinking. There's no resistance in that. And when there's no resistance in something, then there's no attachment to that something. But the majority of people think too much about money, and they worry too much about money. They criticize each other about whether they have too much money or too little money, or they're charging too much or they're charging too little. That's an attachment. And that's something that's very much a reality in this third dimensional experience. And I think a necessary part of our human experience, but one that's going to be changing and that's already starting to change. Service itself is a primary way of being for the majority of people. Now, maybe that's not true for all of you, and if it is, then this is something that I hope that this conversation today will help you to shift as well. And of course, it's a patriarchal society and has been for a while, and fear is a significant influence in most people's lives. And gender significance, meaning I'm male and you're female, or I'm this and you're that. It's a very significant part of our society these days. Everybody's out in the streets parading and announcing their sexuality and their maleness or femaleness or their lack thereof or whatever. That is a very attached experience of even sexuality. Whereas we came here in these structures for who knows what reason, you chose those bodies, and it's just part of your experience. It does not need to be something that has an immense amount of energy around it. It's just an experience. But we do have that gender significance right now, and eventually, as we move closer to fifth dimension, it'll just be neutrality. And it'll just be, we are what we are, and we are here to experience life, and it's not really something we need to have as a major topic of conversation beyond that. And lifespans will right now are very short, and obviously degenerative disease is a very big issue as well. And banks and governments control the world and provide the majority of products and services to the masses, but we are starting to move to a sharing economy. So these are some of the ideas that are taking place in each of these different dimensional experiences. Now, my background is in branding and that sort of thing. I'm not an archaeologist or any of those. We have some amazing people here this weekend who have a lot of expertise in those areas and who travel around the world and investigate these things. And even, I don't know if Barbara is in the audience here, but Barbara Lamb is just this amazing powerhouse woman who treks around the world and investigates crop circles. And I mean, it's so there are amazing people here who have experience in those areas. But my background is in visual. It's in the brand aspect of businesses and companies. And in my former life, I owned an agency that did that, and that's where I come from. So we're going to look at some things from that perspective, and so how we got here as a society and the iconography of ancient roots of our modern society. So this is a statue, a wooden statue, and it's depicting Vishnu here. And Vishnu here is pictured with kind of like a snake or reptilian body. And you can see the reptilian snake beings around Vishnu. And now this in India, these are called Naga. Any of you heard of the Naga? Okay. So the Naga are these reptilian beings or snake-like beings that have been written about in the ancient texts in India, who apparently really lived, and there are artifacts of them all over the world, really, but especially in India and some of the surrounding countries. And supposedly the Naga coexisted with human beings thousands of years ago, and they were apparently very advanced and very technologically advanced, but also very spiritually advanced. And a lot of these ancient gods, like Vishnu, are pictured as Naga. Now, as I said, we're going to look at these things not from an archaeological perspective, but from an iconographical perspective, meaning visually seeing this reptilian sort of artifact. And this is another one. It's a Buddhist sculpture, and you can see, again, the Naga iconography here, where they're showing the same kind of thing, but it's a little bit different. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we have the same here as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So you'll see now they don't all line up to 7, but you'll see that similarity in this different kind of iconography. Here's a more modern, stylized Naga architecture, and you'll see again that same kind of iconography. So my question is, why is this happening? And that's what we're going to get to with this. Now here's another one, a slightly more stylized one with the same kind of reptilian Naga type of iconography. Now this is on the building across the street. And have any of you looked at the building across the street from your hotel rooms? No? Okay, well, we'll look at some of that together. Here's another Shiva sculpture. This one's a really huge sculpture, and there's a snake there as well, which again is depicting either Shiva might have been Naga, or maybe Shiva was in some way aligned with or worshiping, we don't know. But the iconography is certainly there. The snake being is also there. Now, here's Hermes holding Caduceus, and you can't quite see it, but there's a snake going around the pole, and this one also has wings, which is significant. And here's a more modern version of Caduceus. The original one actually only had one snake, but you can see the snake and this bird, or the two wings here as well. And here's a World Health Organization, and we can see the Caduceus and the snake. Now, the Caduceus and the snake entwined like that do represent health in ancient times, so there's some logic there. But the point I'm trying to make is the iconography still exists to this day. This is iconography that goes back tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of years into the past, still exists to this day. Why? I mean, they could have chosen any number of logos for this, but why choose this particular one? American Medical Association, same thing. And of course, we can make the argument, well, this did represent ancient times, health, and so on, and so it makes sense logically to put that there. But in a world full of potential iconography, why choose that? And I'm not saying they intentionally chose this for nefarious reasons. They might have just chosen it because there is a collective vibrational consciousness that still exists on this planet that's sort of guiding the hands of our society to use certain kind of iconography. So pyramids are also very common. I mean, in ancient civilizations, we know the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, also quite common. There are pyramids on rooftops of office buildings too. This happens to be the building across the street. So this, if you go to the upper floors, you can see that the building across the street has pyramids in every corner. That's obviously pyramids. I mean, and so we see that. And of course, we see the Great Pyramid in stylized form on the US dollar as well. And Cleopatra's Needle is one of the obelisks that was moved from an Egyptian area to, this one is actually in New York, in, where is it? In Central Park, yeah. And there's a similar one in London, because New York is kind of an extension of London, so put them both in. Now, in future, I'm going to expand on these ideas. There's way too much to cover here in iconography to put into this short conversation. I just wanted to kind of get the wheels turning a bit and give you an introduction into what this has to do with money. And okay, so American Cancer Society, I get the two snakes. I mean, again, health, but what does that have to do with an obelisk? I don't really know. Now, that is supposed to be a sword, of course, but clearly there's an obelisk in that iconography. And what does that have to do with cancer? So we see a lot of this interesting iconography. This is an ancient Anunnaki carving. And so we see this humanoid being with two wings holding this pine cone, which is quite common. And then in some Anunnaki depictions, it looks like a bird or an eagle holding this pine cone. You guys have seen these, I'm sure, right? Okay. And then here we have the same bird or eagle with a pine cone. So why is this iconography carrying forward to today from ancient times? And what's a pine cone doing in the Vatican? I'm not sure. Well, I mean, I am actually, but we're not going to get into that today because it's going to take us down a different rabbit hole. But anyway, pine cone in the Vatican City, what does it have to do with Catholicism? And why is that iconography there that came from ancient times, tens, hundreds of thousands of years ago, potentially, that is still being carried forward today in various facets of society, whether intentionally or not? Now, I'm not going to argue the point of whether or not the acorn or the pine cone represents a pineal gland. That's not our conversation today. My conversation is the iconography itself. Why does it still exist in modern society? Now, this is the Hindu god Garuda, and you'll find Garuda depictions in India. This one happens to be in Colombia. Garuda is pictured very often with a naga in its mouth. So that's a snake in its mouth. And in India, you'll see that quite commonly, Garuda. Garuda was said to be this god in India that was very fierce and aggressive, and that was always fighting with the naga. So we have this story of these two advanced races that once existed on Earth that warred with each other. And here's another depiction of Garuda, again pictured with, kind of like an eagle-like bird there with a snake in its mouth. And some of the symbolism of Garuda as written in Indian texts symbolizes speed, violence, military prowess, virtue, hope, and rebirth. So we can say, well, that's interesting iconography, interesting symbolism that exists there. And if we look at Tutankhamun, or King Tut's headdress, you can see both in the headdress. Now, how many of you remember when King Tut only had one, that there's a snake up there? Any of you remember that? Yeah, I do too, right? How come it has two now? So, I mean, this is one of the things in the Mandela effect that people are noticing, because I don't remember it having two. So when I found this picture, I thought that was really strange, because I know it didn't have two when I looked at it the last time years ago. So now suddenly it has two, and it has these two beings, which I thought was kind of interesting. And of course, we have Quetzalcoatl in South America, who's a feathered serpent. So we have, again, both iconography there, both the serpent and the bird as well. And here we have Garuda and Naga on the office building across the street. And that, anybody know what that represents? Goddess Ishtar, who is represented by owls. And this is why a lot of politicians worship owls. I don't know if you have seen that. Okay. Because actually Ishtar is one of the goddesses that represents politics. And so they, Bohemian Grove, you guys have heard of Bohemian Grove, right? The politicians worship a big owl there, right? There's a big festival they do every year. Yeah, I mean, it's out there. It's even on Wikipedia, so you can find some information about it. But so we see that iconography even to this day, and this is in a building across the street, that symbology. Now we're going to go a little bit in a right angle here just because I thought this was interesting. So this doesn't really have anything to do with my talk, but but I couldn't resist sharing this because I found it so fascinating. Do you guys know what that is? What's that? Runes? Well, no, they're not runes, but I don't know that. Are they really? I mean, they look kind of like light language, but I think what they are sigils of some kind. Do you know what sigils are, any of you? You know what sigils are? None of you? Really? Wow. Sigils, they look like sigils. I mean, I looked up sigils online to see these are sigils. Or at least they seem like sigils. These are on the building across the street. Okay. It's an office building. Okay, and also I should tell you, this building also has interesting iconography on it on the outside walls. But I couldn't quite make it out from the street level as well as I could from the hotel room looking at the building across the street. So both of these buildings were built by some interesting people who knew some interesting things. Now, sigils are a means by which to focus one's intention to create in this reality. It's a bit it's too complicated to get into how to do a sigil in this conversation, but obviously these individuals or whoever built this building was using some kind of magical principle. I don't mean like David Copperfield magical, but spiritual magical principles in the construction of the building or the intention they set behind it. So, why are we doing an expo in Detroit? It's kind of an interesting place, but you'd never know it if you didn't really look carefully. But there's a lot of architecture in Detroit that has this kind of symbology. So check out the building across the street. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and the snake symbology is quite prevalent in society. And we just sort of take it for granted because we don't think anything of it. Well, there's Garuda, and there's Naga in its mouth. So our US dollar actually has the same iconography. Why? Why are we worshiping ancient gods and goddesses that haven't been around for a long time? Or maybe we're not. Maybe there is some collective vibration that exists in the consciousness of the planet that's influencing our decisions unconsciously to sort of reinforce that idea. Because anytime, just like, the cross has been used in religion for tens of thousands of years at least, probably, maybe even longer. And so now that symbol has the energy built in. So if you put that symbol on your body or on your chest, it contains that energy, that consciousness, even if you have no intention for it, because so many people have thought upon it for thousands of years that energy exists within that structure. And in the same way, by putting a particular iconography on anything that has existed for thousands of years or a long period of time, it brings forth the energy of that. So what does this tell us? Now, the other thing I want to consider is What's that? Because it kind of looks like the stylized iconography. Am I just seeing things? Maybe. But it's awfully coincidental. Why choose that as a pattern? It's interesting. It's compelling. So what does the US dollar really represent then? It represents fighting and dominance and aggression, e pluribus unum, out of many one. But in what way? How are we taking many and making it one? Are we doing it peacefully? Or are we just going to beat everyone up until everybody just conforms to our idea of oneness or do things our way? So this whole currency embodies within it this idea of power and dominance and control and war. So it's not surprising that the United States expresses itself in that way, and that it is this dominant power in the world. And it's no accident that these ancient symbols made it onto the $1 bill. And that is the foundation of the financial structure and system that we live within in this country. Now, this is not exclusive to the United States. There's similar iconography all over the world, not necessarily always just in their currency, but in many aspects of their society and their office buildings and things like that. And many interesting things that I found, like the building across the street. The building across the street is what started this whole talk. It has Roman arches too. Why would it have Roman arches? Well, the Vatican also had Roman arches. Well, I could tell you why it has Roman arches, but that would take us too far off topic. So come back next year, maybe we'll talk about Roman arches. So our ancestors, ancient human beings, or whatever preceded human beings, lived among the gods. The Naga, the Garuda, and perhaps even other gods, the Anunnaki. And we have that still in our genetics to this day. Even though we may not consciously be aware of it. I mean, the nose you have on your face is a nose that's been carried through from your great-great-grandfather, most likely. And in the same way, the experiences that our ancient lineages had are also within our own genetics, our own DNA, and influence how we make decisions and how we live our lives to this day. So if you find that you behave in irrational ways for no apparent reason, it may not be you. It may be something that your grandfather experienced or your grandmother experienced that is still within your whole way of being. So our ancestors lived among gods. And now we're becoming gods. And that's what's in store for us in the future that we're heading into. But we've become accustomed, nonetheless, to being ruled by gods. And that's still in our makeup to this day. And this is the place where we find ourselves now is, well, we are becoming advanced enough as beings to where we're starting to question whether we need gods. But at the same time, we're nonetheless still ruled by gods. And our gods tell us how we should live our lives and whether we should pay our taxes and how much we should pay and how much money should this person have. And those gods are our gateway to source. So you go to your God and the gods are ones that make abundance available to us. When as we become more evolved as beings, we don't need gods to limit our connection to source. We just choose by our own way of being, our own potential. So I want you to sort of visualize this. So imagine this third dimensional construct are things like governments, religions, the legal system, banks, the financial systems, and those exist in this third dimensional space. And what that does is it limits us from having full access because of the constraints they put on us. And when separated from source by these constructs, we experience those limitations, but then we uphold and we reinforce those limitations in one another, meaning because you live in a society that has these limitations between us and source, we actually perpetuate that in each other. Like our parents who say, you must go to college and get a degree in this or you will fail. It's not a real thing, but they believe it, and it's a societal structure that limits our source potential. Who's to say that that person can't go on and become a painter and be very successful, or an animal communicator and be very successful? But, if you were to tell your parents back in the day when we were kids, I want to be an animal communicator, or I want to be a spiritual teacher, right? And so we are perpetuating the structure that's been created for us and limiting each other from source. And so our gods, or these structures, and I'm not referring to gods as a person here, but gods are these structures like religion and governments and so on. They don't have to govern us anymore because we govern each other. We stop each other from reaching our potential and from connecting to source. We don't necessarily need anyone to do it for us. And that's where we've come as a society right now. And by doing that, we are just perpetuating that disconnection from source ourselves. So we can't blame society anymore. We can't blame governments. We can't blame the IRS. We can't blame any of those people because they don't have to do anything. We do it just fine on our own. And that's what we found ourselves at. And really, our connection to source or someone else's connection to source is none of anybody else's business. And I'm going to use that in a certain context so you understand what I'm saying. For example, if someone said, let's say you offer some product or service, or a lot of you are healers and you're working in some field or another, and somebody may look at what you're saying and say, well, you're charging too much. And you may think, well, maybe I'm charging too much. He's right. I should lower my prices and make them low enough so this person can afford to pay for what I'm charging. Well, that person's lack of abundance or disconnection from source is not something you can change. You lowering your prices or saying that I'm not as worthy of source because this other person is not as worthy of source is not making that other person more worthy of source. It's simply making you less worthy of source. And you are just limiting yourself. Instead, we need to bring everybody up so that we can all thrive and be abundant and live to our potential. Because in this physical reality that we all chose to come into, money at the moment in this current form is still a construct that we have to live with that limits our potential if we don't have what we need to live what we came here to live. So that's something that you want to keep in mind is you cannot change another person's connection to source. Only you can change your own. You have to leave it to other people to change theirs. And so your objective is to live to your fullest potential and don't let the things of this world limit you from what you came here to do and play a small life because you feel like, well, if I live big enough, then other people are going to criticize me for living so big and doing big things. You can't change another person's connection to source. Now, how many of you pay your taxes? Don't be shy. Okay. And I won't, how many of you don't pay your taxes? Okay, that's what I thought. All right, and so tell me, why do you pay your taxes? Because what? It's mandatory. Like, what'd you say? They've got the guns and we don't. That's a good reason. Anybody else? Why do you pay your taxes? You don't want to pay penalties. Nobody cares about the roads and the bridges and stuff like that. Where does the majority of our tax money go? Does it go to roads and bridges? Yeah, it goes to the military. The majority of the money goes to the military. So fight wars. So when you pay taxes, you're not building bridges or roads or helping starving people. You are financing wars. And I know you're doing it unintentionally, and we all have good intentions and want good things to happen in the world. But, what's that?
We are supporting charity.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't really matter who the person is in government. Regardless, the money still goes the same place. It actually goes to pay for interest on loans that the government borrows from the Federal Reserve that goes to fight wars. So it's a bit more complicated than that, but essentially your tax dollars are going to kill people in other countries, or maybe even in this country. Now, from a vibrational standpoint, I'm sure none of you would agree with that idea. Now, I want to just take a little break here. This is a long video, but I'm going to play a little bit of a clip of it. Bear with the first few minutes because it's a little bit of, this is a congressional hearing. What's that? Taxes are illegal? It's not only illegal, but I'd like to know what you guys think after you hear this. The first few minutes is just congressional nonsense, so ignore that. And I'm not going to play the whole video because it's too long. Just long enough to provoke a little thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony. And let me key off of something, Mr. Miller, you said. You said foolish mistakes were made. I think the President actually said it better. He said that the handling of those tax-exempt applications in that process at the IRS was outrageous and intolerable. No excuse. And as much as we know that the folks at IRS have a thankless job because they have to go and tell their fellow Americans that they may be audited or they have to do this work understaffed, we have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
And so you are right, it was a foolish mistake, but the President's even more correct that it was outrageous and intolerable. Now, let me also focus on something, Mr. George, you said. When you were asked, was there any finding or evidence of political motivation here, you said no.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And so what we find is a situation where inexcusable activity took place because it erodes the confidence of the American people in a system where they participate voluntarily. And if there's a place in public service where you have to have the highest level of conduct and standards, it's at the IRS. And so, Mr. Miller, I think it's unfortunate for those who are in positions of authority, but the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think that's exactly what we're saying. That should not diminish the good work that has been done by anyone within the IRS over the years. And so I hope you understand that you are here today talking to us because we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to clean up and clear out so we can go back to the business of making sure that people respect the fact that we have a voluntary system of paying our taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, I want to talk a little about the culture of the organization. I was looking at the note, your bio, 90,000 employees, $12 billion budget. You've been there 25 years. I'm concerned, and I guess to start off, we've got a mission statement there. I'm very concerned about the breadth and the depth of maybe what's going on. I think a lot of employees probably do a good job, but I've been a person that's been in business 30 years and run larger organizations. So you've got a mission statement in terms of talking about working for the American people, doing what's right, playing by the rules. Is that something that's internalized at the IRS, or is that just something on a website?
So I believe, Congressman, it's internalized, and the vast majority of our folk are hardworking, incredibly honest people. I'm going to tell you, and you guys should hear that as these discussions occur, it's damaging to the morale of those people. It's probably ultimately damaging to the sense of voluntary compliance, which underlies our entire tax system.
So, how many of you pay your taxes? Voluntarily, right? Voluntarily. Well, that's because if you work for somebody else, you don't really have the choice because the employer is volunteering to pay taxes on your behalf. Yes. Now, you can back out of that, though, but it's a little bit more complicated than not doing it in the first place. So if you are self-employed and you're paying your taxes, you're volunteering to do it. And it's a voluntary tax system, and they have to maintain the integrity of that so you don't find out. Because if enough people did find out, then that would cause problems in the system. So as I was saying earlier, we came from a time in ancient times where we lived among gods, and where gods were superior to us in many ways. And we still have that in our genetics, and we still live in that way. And we are choosing to govern ourselves. Now, if you were to tell somebody, you're going to go home, you're going to say, Ethan made me watch this video about the tax system, and they're going to say, you better pay your taxes or they're going to throw you in jail, right? So we are maintaining the system, and we are keeping each other in check. Within the system, we are limiting our connection to source. We don't need the government to do it. They just have to put someone on TV every once in a while to scare everybody, and then the rest of everybody else just complies. So much of our society is structured that way in this third dimensional awareness. Now, this is all going to change, and it already is actually. But I'm showing this to you because, well, the way it's going to change is enough people are just going to stop volunteering. And it's already happening. The numbers in the US alone of people who are voluntarily not paying their taxes are increasing year after year after year. And especially with the introduction of cryptocurrencies, which we'll talk about briefly later, in the last several years, there have been many people who have become multimillionaires and billionaires in investing in cryptocurrency. And of those, about 0.4% paid their taxes. And many of them are millionaires. But so we're moving into this future system where fewer and fewer people are volunteering to participate in it. Now, money or value exchange started a long time ago in different ways. One of the ancient ways is trading shells. So once upon a time, people would trade shells with each other to convey value. There are many other methods of trading value that have existed throughout our ancient history, but this is one of the most common things that was done. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. And then it became gold, and we traded gold, and eventually gold was replaced with a currency that was backed by gold. And so the currency actually represented the gold, and then it became fiat currency, which is what we have today, which actually isn't backed by anything, it's just an idea. But what we're seeing here is this gradual move from tangible physical things to things that are less physical, to where now most of you have credit and debit cards, and you probably hardly ever touch a physical currency anymore. And what this is showing us is we're moving to a future where exchange of value, or money as we know it, is becoming less tangible, less physical, more vibrational, more energetic. And that's the next step. So the planet Uranus entered Taurus last May, and last time it was there was in 1934. And it'll be there till 2026. And what this is going to do is it's going to move us toward a society that is actually not physically oriented toward currency or value exchange anymore. Meaning by 2026, most currencies are probably going to be illegal or collector's items. And this is already happening in many countries, like Venezuela has experienced hyperinflation, where there's money flying around in the streets because it's worth nothing anymore. People are making purses out of $1,000 bills in Venezuela because their currency inflated so much that it's worthless. And so how is this going to come about? It's already happening. So this is not a pie in the sky idea. This is happening today. Well, first of all, for example, currency is going to become illegal. And it's already starting in Australia, where they're going to ban $100 bills, and they're not going to have cash within 10 years. So we're moving to a future where things are going to be digital currency, so less tangible, less physical, which is closer to source in many ways. The problem is this is still controlled by governments, so it's not really. But I want you to just consider the idea of moving to a digital currency all over the world, where nobody's exchanging physical things, is actually a move towards source, because source has that intangibility. It doesn't have to be physical. And as we move to fourth to fifth dimension, not only are our bodies becoming lighter, but also the constructs in our reality are. Do you have a question? Or? Yes, question is, would this not provide absolute control for governments? Yes, it will. But this will. But we're going to get to what isn't going to. So the move toward a digital currency system, in and of itself, it's just like I can use a stick to walk with, or I can make something with it, or I can beat someone over the head with a stick. A stick, it's still the same stick. It has no meaning or purpose. Just like money has no purpose or meaning of itself. It's just an agreed upon means of exchange. But you can use money for evil, and you can use money for good. And money, or currency in this case, in the hands of a government, can be used for evil or whatever they intend. And yes, a digital currency in the hands of a government can be used to control people more. Because where right now, if you have $100 in your pocket, you still have $100 in your pocket. If your $100 is digital and in a bank, they can turn your account off, and now you don't have $100. So they have control, and they can track your $100, what you spent it on, and do whatever they want with that data. And this is part of this move. When we're moving from a third to a fifth dimension, or third to a fourth dimension, you're going to see the existing structures trying to cope with that change by adapting, by taking their existing way of doing things and adapting to the new thing. But at the same time, there's going to be this undercurrent of the new thing that's going to be its own thing. And this is what's happening here, is the existing structures are trying to adapt and to cause us to embrace their way of doing things. But, and of course, some other things here, China's central bank is developing a digital currency. So China's not going to have a physical currency anymore either. Walmart is patenting a stablecoin. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the Facebook Libra coin, but Facebook is also launching a digital currency, which they're going to use on their platform. So if you buy something at some store, you can use Libra coin. You don't have to use the US dollar anymore. Now, this has made a big uproar in the US government recently because they're afraid of the competition. So there was a hearing with Facebook just in the last month over them working on this Libra coin. But so what's happening is, instead of the US dollar, you're going to have the Walmart dollar, you're going to have the Facebook Libra dollar, and all these other, JP Morgan Chase has their own. So we're moving toward a multi-currency future where companies will issue currencies. But the problem is they still control them because they're centralized. And so it to your point, can they not control more when they have their own currency in digital form? Yes, they absolutely can. But at the same time, we have decentralized cryptocurrencies that also are coexisting. Now, so Bitcoin, as an example, and this is not going to be a Bitcoin conversation. So if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, Aaron Sudo's here teaching a workshop on it, and he'll go much more in depth into it. So we're not going to cover it in depth here, but just enough to say that Bitcoin is a digital cryptocurrency that was not created by a government. We don't actually know who created it for sure. It was created by some mystery person or group back in 2009, and it flourished, and it was worth less than $1, I think maybe less than a penny or something like that back in 2009. Now it's around $12,000 right now per Bitcoin. So if you had bought 100 Bitcoin back then, you would be quite well off today. But Bitcoin is not controlled by any government. It cannot be controlled by any government. It cannot be shut down by any government, short of them shutting down the entire internet and blowing a satellite out of the sky. They can't shut down Bitcoin because there's even a satellite in space now that carries the Bitcoin network. So as long as the internet exists, even if the internet went down, Bitcoin would still survive because it still exists on people's computers all over the world and Bitcoin nodes. So Bitcoin is a first iteration of a currency that has existed in our modern society that is created by the people, is controlled by the people, and cannot be controlled by any government. It's decentralized and it's de-inflationary, meaning the US dollar 100 years ago was worth about $1. where today it's worth about 2 or 3 cents or 5 cents, I think. So our purchasing power has gone down 95% in the last 100 or so years. And it's going to continue to do that. This is what happened with Venezuela with hyperinflation. The US dollar is happening too. So if you bought an iPhone 10 years ago and now it's doubled or tripled in price, well, that's, it's not just Apple increased their prices, but because inflation of the US dollar happened also. Now, Bitcoin is de-inflationary. It actually goes the opposite direction. It becomes more scarce with time, and that's part of the reason why its value increases. But the most important thing is it cannot be controlled or shut down by any government, nor is there any central party controlling it. So there is no Federal Reserve saying, oh, we're going to do quantitative easing, or we're going to print more money and devalue the dollar and, in a sense, tax all of you. You know, every time that the Federal Reserve prints more money, you're getting taxed because the value or the cost of goods goes up and you had no say in that. But whereas Bitcoin, there's no central authority, there's no government. It's all of us, people all over the world who carry the Bitcoin network. And eventually it's going to run on everybody's mobile phones and everything. So you would have to eliminate every person on the planet and all their devices to get rid of it. So it's not going away. And while there are government-centered digital currencies, we also have the whole cryptocurrency movement that's now starting. And that is part of what this Uranus and Taurus influences, because it's a restructuring of the financial system. And in the meantime, we're seeing a lot of banks starting to collapse as well. So the whole financial system is in the process of a rapid, accelerated evolution and destabilization between now and about 2027 or something like that. So it's really a very remarkable time. This has never happened before. And it's the first time we have control financially. Could you step up to the mic?
Ethan, when you said that Bitcoin cannot be taken over by the bank, it's decentralized, is it just specific to Bitcoin, or the other coins have the same, the Litecoin and the Libra, are they also decentralized? Because I know there's a lot of financial institutions involved in the other ones, and I just wanted clarification on that. Is that unique
Libra,
to Bitcoin?
Libra itself or all cryptocurrencies?
All the different cryptos, like, are they all decentralized or just Bitcoin?
They're not all decentralized yet. That's the idea. Now, as we move forward, and I'll talk about that in a minute, as we move forward into the next couple of decades, everything's going to become decentralized. But as it stands today, Bitcoin and a handful of others are the only ones that are decentralized, and really Bitcoin is the only one that's decentralized in any meaningful way right now. And things like Libra coin, which is Facebook or Walmart or JP Morgan's cryptocurrency as well, or the Bank of China, those are all very centralized. Centralized meaning there is a central authority that can shut it down, they can print more, they can track you. So whenever you have centralized authority, the people don't have power, because a centralized authority can make decisions. They can close your bank account and you're out of luck. And they do that. Whereas a decentralized system cannot be shut down by anybody, by any authority, by any institution. You have 100% control over that thing. Bitcoin cannot be shut down, meaning if you have Bitcoin in your Bitcoin wallet, which is an electronic wallet, not a physical one, then nobody can take that away from you unless you willingly give it to them. They can't shut it down. They can't close your account. You have full control over it and whatever value you're carrying in it. And as it's an appreciating asset, it'll be worth more 10 years from now than it is today. So versus keeping it in the dollar, which will probably be worth less 10 years from now than it is today with the constant printing of new currency. Now, that having been said, majority of the more popular cryptocurrencies are intending to become more decentralized. But part of decentralization is the more people that are involved in the network. Bitcoin happens to have this massive network because it was the very first one. And there are millions of people all over the world, including financial institutions and governments, that are supporting the network and buying Bitcoin and so on. But no one has enough control to manipulate it because it's so huge now, right at this point. And it's continuing to grow exponentially every year. the bigger it grows, the more decentralized it becomes, the less controllable it is by any individual or institution. So this is the first exchange system that we've had in our modern times that is not created or controlled by any authority, and that is fully controlled by the people. This is where we're heading, is a society that is controlled by the people, that is governed by the people, that centralized institutions will no longer control or govern. And this is one of the early signs of that. Now here's an actual, that really is his name. I would have changed that, but I'm a numerologist. Anyway, so this is a quote. He says, if the United States were to decide we didn't want cryptocurrency to happen in the United States and tried to ban it, I'm pretty confident we couldn't succeed. What's that? And they can't succeed. They know they can't. They can't shut down a decentralized currency because they can't do that unless they confiscate everybody's computers all over the planet and remove the satellite from space. So they can't do it. And turn off the internet. Now, the March 2023 to January 2044, planet Pluto enters Aquarius. And from my perspective, this is when the Age of Aquarius is really going to begin. Although no cycle turns on a dime, this is something we're already starting to see, but we are about to enter the Age of Aquarius very soon. And these earlier signs like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, the sharing economy are all the early stages of this Age of Aquarius that's going to come in. Now, as we get closer to this 2023 date, time is going to speed up, and we're going to see an acceleration of time. And one way we'll see that is the rapid succession of innovations coming out to the world, and the ability to manifest and create faster with less time space between the intention and the creation. So Pluto in Aquarius is going to accelerate progress on this planet, not only in spiritual awakening, but also massive technological innovations that are going to benefit society. Now, I mentioned earlier about the Tesla car. Now, imagine what's going to happen eventually is, and this is already, one of the cryptocurrencies actually is working on automating self-driving cars to where they're fully autonomous, meaning the car will have its own cryptocurrency bank account. So it will go out there, let's say as a cab, and let's say you bought this car and you put it out there, and it's driving and it's collecting its fares, and it's putting it into your bank account, and then it goes to the car repair shop whenever it needs repairs on its own. It pays the shop on its own for the repairs that were made, and it comes back to your house, and it continually is driving and doing its thing. You don't have to do a thing. It has its own bank account, so it's doing its own thing. So what happens if the owner of that car dies? Well, the car doesn't die. It continues to do that. So at some point in our future society, we are going to have fully autonomous services out there that are providing for us without having any owner behind it, without having any human being behind that product or service, that are just simply serving society in this fully autonomous way. These are things that you're going to see in the next 10 or 20 years. I mean, it's already possible now, but the technology isn't yet available. But this is the society we're moving into, is the society where we're going to have such an immense amount of abundance and resources that are provided for us to live a very, very different life than we've ever had. So Pluto and Aquarius, some of the early signs I mentioned, cryptocurrency, universal basic income is another thing. A lot of countries and private institutions are proposing a universal basic income, meaning everybody will receive a certain base income without having to work. And then beyond that, if you want to work, you can. Because imagine in the next 10 to 20 years, well, we won't need truck drivers anymore because trucks will drive themselves. And we won't need cab drivers anymore because the cars will drive themselves, and they'll pick up passengers by themselves, they'll repair themselves. So we don't need that anymore. We don't need UPS drivers because, well, the trucks will drive themselves, and they'll probably have robots on them that actually deliver the packages, or they'll be delivered by drone, or 3D printers will print them. So you'll order an iPhone on Amazon, and it'll print in your house. You don't have to go have it delivered. This is the idea of time speeding up. When time speeds up, the idea to manifestation of that idea shortens. So we already are 3D printing houses, and there are companies experimenting with 3D printing food. I wouldn't suggest you try that food yet, but eventually we're heading to a world where there'll be food replicators. It's a real technology now that's in the testing stage, where they'll be able to 3D print whatever kind of food you want, with whatever kind of nutrient balance you want. This is a real thing. It's not Star Trek sci-fi anymore. So we're seeing these potentials now. Also, there are different things in the cryptocurrency movement, like staking and airdrops. Airdrops, basically getting money for free. These are just different ways of receiving different kinds of income through cryptocurrencies without having to work. So we are moving into, and even cryptocurrency, real estate, so we're moving into this future where money will not be as limited. Now, what I'm trying to convey to you here is this is the fourth dimensional space. This is the space where there's less resistance between us and Source, and therefore Source provides us for us more abundantly without us having to put forth labor or effort or a struggle in order to have Source provide. That's the next stage we're heading into, is that type of future, and then we'll take that next step to that fifth dimensional space. As I said, 3D printing is a technology. More and more medical institutions are incorporating holistic technologies as well, things like Reiki and even much more advanced alternative therapies. There are some amazing alternative therapies out there that have scientific evidence showing their effectiveness that are not conventional technologies or conventional methods of healing. And Lightworkers are being activated at this time too. And during that Pluto and Aquarius period, we're going to see the masses start to awaken. And fewer people paying their taxes every year. Which, with cryptocurrency, it's already happening. As I said earlier, only 0.4% of all the millions of people who are making money in cryptocurrency have paid their taxes in the last several years. 0.4%. And they've made billions of dollars, which makes the IRS very concerned, obviously. And they're trying to get these people to comply, but really, how can you, if you don't know where the bank account is and you don't really know how much money that person has, you can't confiscate it anyway, they're kind of in a bind. And this is where we're heading into in the future. So your role in this, and let me see. Okay, we have a half an hour to cover a lot of stuff. So your role in this, as we're moving into this amazing future, this fourth dimensional space that's going to have lots of amazing opportunities for all of us, is to discover your life mission, which I'll talk about how to do that, developing your gifts and talents, and deliberate practice, which I'll explain what that is, slow incremental steps toward a long-term vision and creating a legacy, not a job. And the distinction between a legacy and a job is a job dies with you and a legacy lives on. Many of you have jobs. If you have a job, because, when you die, your job's gone. But if you create a legacy, you may still have a job. But when you leave this incarnation, your legacy lives on. Maybe you'll build a new institution. Maybe you'll build schools for kids. And those things maybe you'll write books. Maybe you'll create the next Reiki, and many future generations will be teaching that to their kids and to their kids' kids, and it'll live on for hundreds of years. That's a legacy, not a job. So you want to try to create a legacy from your being here. And if you create a legacy, it will provide for you more money than you will need, and it'll also provide you the opportunity to really make an impact on the planet. Most people have this job mentality. Even when we move from conventional work to a unconventional field, we still have job mentality. And we think, okay, I'm going to do X amount of sessions per week, and it's going to make me this amount of money, and that I can use to pay the bills. This is the mentality people have even in spiritual fields. But I'm asking you to think beyond that. Think beyond that to the point where you might ask yourself, well, if I did something that was so big that was still here 100 years from now when I'm not even here anymore, what would that be? What would that look like? What is it that I'm here to do that's so unique and special that only I could do and that I could leave behind for many future generations? That is a legacy, not a job. And that's what I want you all to strive to do, and that's the point of this conversation today. Now, we'll maybe expound on some of these other ideas later on in the talk if we have time. I don't want to get too sidetracked on these today at this time. So this is my definition of life mission based on my own experiences and working with Lightworkers and, lots of things that I've read and things like that too. But life mission, now, there's this common saying, follow your passion and the money will come. I can tell you that following your passion will make you poor most of the time. So money doesn't necessarily come if you follow your passion. But where passion lines up with your unique potential is where the money will come. Where passion lines up with extraordinary ability is where that money will come. Now, for me right now, I'm doing something that I'm really good at, that I'm extraordinarily good at, that nobody else on the planet can do in all the different aspects of what I do. So there's no competition in that. Nobody can compete with me because I'm doing something that's unique and special to me. And where there's no competition, there's no limitation in what I can do in the world or how much I can earn or whatever the case may be. So I'm not thinking about the money because I don't have to think about the money, because what I'm doing is that extraordinary. So each of you, you need to find where your passion meets with your extraordinary ability and talents, meaning something extraordinary, meaning something that you can do better than everyone else on the planet that nobody else could do. And those two things, where they meet, is where you can really contribute something huge in the world and where you can really make an impact and leave something behind. So look at it that way. Don't just follow your passion, because, I had a very good friend who actually is the one who originally taught me astrology a long time ago. He smoked a lot of pot, so, But anyway, the point is, when he was 45, 50 years old, he decided he wanted to start a surf band because he was going to be famous musician. Now, he had a band when he was a kid. He never played music in between, so he really didn't have that much talent. He was an amazing guy, but he didn't have the talent to actually be a surf band person and be successful at it. So that's where passion did not meet with extraordinary ability, and it didn't go anywhere. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is you want to make sure passion meets with extraordinary ability, and that's where the success will come in what you're doing. As I said, life mission should not be driven by money. Money should exist like the air that you're breathing, but it should not be a thought that you're concerned about, thinking about, worried about. It should be adequate for you to live to your potential, but it should not be a thought on your mind, other than what you have to do to deal with it on a day-to-day basis for running whatever it is you do, but it shouldn't be an attachment. So, so you shouldn't use money or power as a motivation for your mission. It should just be a side effect of doing really good things in the world. If you do amazing big things in the world in this way as I'm describing here, there will be plenty of money, and you won't have to think about it. Okay, so these are some ways, and I use these tools with the people I work with in my Lightworker program, and I'm going to demonstrate how it works in my life. But these are ways you can identify and I can tell you it works. It works. So it may seem very simple, but it totally works. So don't discount what you're seeing here as being too simple. Childhood gifts, I find a lot of times are not there by accident. You came here to express those things, and quite often as children we don't have resistance to source to the degree that we have as adults. And so a lot of times our abilities and our potentials are present from birth. A lot of children or adults remember extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial contact as children, and oftentimes forget about it until later in life. But those things nonetheless existed. They're not accidental. You wouldn't have those contacts if they weren't significant somehow in your role here. Areas, life interests, if you have a life interest, that may be something also. Career focus is also relevant. A lot of times people I work with who are in the medical profession, for example, actually end up being healers in some alternative, more advanced, holistic field. So there's no accident to the interest that you choose. Areas where you have a high level of skill or experience are also relevant, and unique ways where you affect other people. For example, if you're around people, okay, let's say can I use you as Darren as a guinea, put you on the spot? Okay. So when I met Darren about a year ago, he was just sitting in the audience, and we started working together, and we identified he had this unique ability that he shared with some of you who attended his thing this weekend. And, well, how we got to that is, I had him write out his life story, and I looked over it, and I noticed something really interesting, which is that, so he's been a dentist for 30 years, was it, or 50 years? I don't know how long. 45 years, okay. And, well, his patients really loved him. And, who loves their dentist, right? Let's be honest. So I thought, well, that's odd. Why would his patients... Right, so it made me think there's got to be something about him that's causing this. It can't just be he drills teeth better than everybody else. And that was what made me look deeper into him and say there's got to be some other thing at play there, some consciousness or energy or something that's causing this effect. So that's what I mean by here, is the unique ways that you affect other people, which you may not ever even have thought anything of, are probably telling you something about something that makes you special that you didn't notice. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a little bit of my journey and help you understand in a real example of how this can actually come together. So I've never shown this picture before, but that's me. That's 7th grade. Now, in 7th grade, I was born. I'm from India, and my parents are Indian. I was born into a family with conventional Indian beliefs, and not extraterrestrial, spiritual teacher kind of stuff I do today. But I was this guy from outer space on a spaceship. My name was Orion. Go figure. And I came to Earth to try to figure out what Christmas was about. Yeah. Now, what are the chances? Right? And now you might think, okay, so what similarities do you see here? Well, I've been in front of audiences since I was a kid, right? Right. So look at your life that way. There are no coincidences in the things that you've done, even before you knew you were doing anything. So I've been on stage since I was a little kid. Even this is only one of many things I've done when I was in elementary school and junior high and beyond. I've always been on stage in some way or another. Now you might think from this that I must be extremely confident being in front of audiences and well, back then I remember I was scared to death being in front of an audience, but I did it anyway. I don't know why. Something just compelled me that I have to do this. I really want to do this. I don't know why. I don't really want to do it. It's very uncomfortable, but I did it anyway, which, it doesn't make any sense. But nonetheless, I did that. So we can see that similarity there. There's obviously some extraterrestrial thing going on in my head, even as a child, and here I am today. That's what I do. I work with people. I have these kind of conversations every day with people, and it was something that I was doing even as a young child. And this is a company my first company first major company. I was actually even more business oriented as a child, but can you tell who I am in there? Yeah. I had a lot more hair back then, so that's me. And a mustache, yeah. That's me, yeah. Yeah. So again, in front of audiences. This was an entertainment company that I started back in high school, just out of high school actually, and other people who worked with me. And so I was in front of audiences, and moving on, this is a company that I had before I moved in this direction, in the branding and marketing and creative fields, and developing technology for large companies and so on. I do that today. I walked away from that, completely walked away from it, and then it came back into my life again in this new form. So again, something I did in the past, everything I'm doing today is in my past. If I look back at my past, it's all there. I learned all of these things through a lifetime of experience and synchronicities and weird occurrences that got me to here. This next one, so I was a professional trader for a number of years. So I was very immersed in the financial system, and I used to teach people how to invest in the markets and things like that. So that's also part of, I'm talking about cryptocurrency and things like that. I have a lot of background in those fields. I'm bringing that in. So I'm coming into the spiritual world with a lot of groundedness in my background. And that's why you see everything that we do look and feel the way that it does, because it's a product of my past. And then just before I was about to start a trading conference, I had a spiritual awakening and abandoned everything. And my whole life fell apart. And I never ended up doing the conference. I built the website and was just about to do it. And of course, instead, I do this. So even conferences and events were in my past. And then of course, now we have the expo. So you can kind of see how my journey has been from even when I was a very small child to now, and how all of those things, now there are plenty more things and synchronicities and experiences, but this is just to give you a few ideas that if you look at your past, that it has all of the seeds of what you came here to do. The thing is, most human beings don't pay attention to that stuff, and so they miss those cues and they kind of meander around in life without actually getting to the point. But all the while, your higher self is guiding you in these directions, trying to get you to notice and go more intentionally in a certain direction. And that's what you need to do, is you need to piece those puzzle pieces together and discover what is it you're here to do. And I can tell you, and because I've worked with a lot of light workers over the years, everybody is special and unique in some extraordinary way and has the ability to do something that no one else can do. Because with everybody I've worked with over the years, we were able to extract that from them and get them out there doing it. So I know that every one of you has that potential because it's never failed. So that's what I want you to try to do, is to explore that within yourself. Now, these are just some of the obstacles that I find. Fear is the main one. Most people are just afraid to take the steps to do things. And if we have time, I only have a few minutes, but I'll share with you a little bit of how I got here and some of the obstacles and difficulties I've had to deal with. And there was a time in my life I was very attached to money. I was entrepreneurial even as a child, and I grew up in an Indian family, and money was the only important thing. So, how much money I someday might make and how much respect that'll bring to the family, that was the most important thing. Nothing else really mattered. So I grew up with this attachment idea of money, and I adopted it in my earlier years in life as well. And so impatient for correct timing, and we're not going to talk about that in depth, but everything has a right time, not just for you, but also the collective. You may come into this world to do something at a certain time, and if you do it earlier than that time, the collective may not be ready at that time. If I were to do this 30 years ago, nobody would have cared. And the tools to do it the way that I do now would not have been available yet. So a lot of things have to do with timing, and sometimes you have to be patient. We all have our own unique cycles. I talk about that in more depth in other talks, but this time we're not going to get into cycles themselves. Not in vibrational alignment with the intended mission, which is a very deep topic in itself, but that's one issue as well. And as I said earlier, if passion doesn't meet experience and expertise, If you have scarcity issues, which is the same as attachment to money, then that can also cause a problem, getting stuck in a loop of doing rather than deliberate expansion and focus on self only and density. Most people, if you have an attachment to money, you're focused on self. And most people are focused on self anyway. We are living in a society today where the majority of human beings are very much focused on self. Even those who think that they're focused on others are really focused on themselves. We're moving into a world, though, where both will integrate. The ideal way of being is where self and others are one, where what you're doing and what you're living for yourself, or rather what you're doing, what you're living for others, is the same as what you're doing for yourself. As an example, what I'm doing here today, I enjoy doing. It's something that I love doing. It's a passion for me. It's a mission for me. I get to do what I enjoy, and I get to work with people who I enjoy working with and talking about things that are really fascinating. And at the same time, by doing that and living that, I get to serve all of you in a way that you want to be served, either at events like this or YouTube videos or whatever. The world is better because of what I'm doing, that I'm doing because I want to do it. So this is where service to self meets service to others. We don't live in that society yet, in that as a whole. As a whole, we live in a society where most people are service to self. And even most people who think they're serving others are really serving themselves. They're serving others under their own terms, not necessarily, does the President of the United States really serve the people? Or does the President of the United States serve himself and perhaps a few other people in his circles? And the rest of us have to deal with that. And we will eventually move into, as we get into this fourth to fifth dimensional space, a world where service to self will meet service to others in the broad society. We are heading there now. And a lot of these decentralized technologies and things like that, the Age of Aquarius that I mentioned earlier, Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring about a decentralized society where people will more and more often align service to self with service to others, where they both coexist as one. So I want you to think about that when you are going out into the world and choosing what you're going to do with your lives, is to try to create something where service to self meets service to others, where they coexist at all times. And that's the best of both worlds. Now you get to make the world better and enhance the lives of others unconditionally. At the same time, you benefit as well in whatever way you need to. Okay, so I'm going to share in the next 9 minutes, I think, a little bit of my story, because I get emails from people all over the world, and even a lot of the light workers I work with ask these questions of me, and this talk was really centered on answering a lot of those questions that I get all the time. And I can tell you that one of the biggest problems that I run into with the people I work with in my Lightworker program is money. And majority of them, they hit a brick wall when we talk about money. And it's because there is this inherent sense of lack of worthiness when it comes to money, which is just simply a lack of connection to source, because, well, money is just an expression of source, and therefore it should have no meaning. It's just there to serve you in whatever way. But when we get to the topic of money, because it has to be a topic, if you're going to go out into the world and thrive and make the world better, it takes money to put on a conference like this. I couldn't do it if I didn't have any money. And same for all of you. If you're going to change the world in some extraordinary, huge way in this current third dimensional construct of a world, you're going to need a lot of money to do it. And if you're limiting yourself financially, you're never going to do anything. Now, maybe you're perfectly content sitting in a cave in India, meditating and, breathing the air and sun gazing. You don't need food, you don't need anything, and you're blissfully happy. Great. If that's the life that you came here to live and it brings you joy, you don't need money. But if you, many of you I'm sure know Sadhguru, right? Sadhguru, spiritual Indian guru. now I don't know his financial situation personally, but I am aware of some other very well-known gurus. They make hundreds of millions of dollars in order to support that organization that they run. So I'm guessing Sadhguru's probably in that range. It's not something you can do with no money. So when I hear Lightworkers discounting or denouncing money because it's evil and how dare that person charge so much, that's kind of ridiculous, because you need that if you're, now I'm not suggesting that everybody uses their money in a service to self-service to others way. But if you do align and create that kind of life for yourself, you're going to need a lot of money in this current reality to do big things. So that's an issue that comes up a lot. Now, as I said earlier, I've had a lot of attachment to money when I was younger. When I was in my early 20s and 30s, I was entrepreneurial, and my goal was to make $1 million by 30. I didn't know why, I just wanted $1 million. And that, well, actually, that was from 20 to 30. And then from 30 to 40, I went completely the other way, where I denounced money because I thought money is evil, I don't want any money. And actually, I made more money when I did that, which is interesting, right? Because when you put something in your vibration, like wanting $1 million, and then you suddenly don't care anymore, it actually comes, because you remove the resistance that was there in your wanting of it. The wanting of a thing creates resistance around the thing and prevents you from having the thing. So if you want something, you have to want it and get out of the way in order for it to manifest. So, I've created many businesses in my life. Many of them have failed. I've gone bankrupt. I've started over numerous times. And this conference, a lot of people ask me, well, I want to do these big things, but I don't know where to start. And I failed so many times, and I don't know that I don't think I can do it. And I can tell you, the first conference we did was at Cobo Center in downtown Detroit. I had no money, literally had no money. Ask anyone. Michaela is one of the, Barb and Michaela were on were in my group back then. I couldn't afford groceries because my previous company went under, and I had no money. I couldn't afford groceries. My power was being cut off. My internet was being cut off. I didn't have a car, so I walked to the store. So I literally had no money. We did our first energy transfer event in a Troy Public Library because it didn't cost anything. We didn't charge donations or anything, so I didn't get any money from doing those in the beginning. And eventually the library kicked us out, so I had to charge donations to rent a venue. But I had no money back then when we started it. So when we started the first conference, it was just because I knew I had to do it. I had no money to do it. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And I thought, oh, you build it, they will come. I can tell you, if you build it, they don't necessarily come. And they certainly didn't come, not enough to pay the cost of that first expo. And so here we are on number 7. I don't know, how do we get from, the first one was a total disaster, but, and the second one we did in a suburb of Detroit in a hotel there. And it was about a $40,000 event. I had no money still. I didn't have any clients. I was hardly known. You guys, you watch YouTube videos and such. Well, it's taken years to build that. I didn't have an audience back then. And so I had no income because my former business was gone. I, didn't have a lot of resources of my own. So I had come to a decision at that point in my life that if I had to live on the streets and feed the pigeons, I'd be okay with that. So that experience actually caused a detachment of money within me, where I went so far to the extreme of not having, to where I came to the awareness that I didn't care, that I was willing to not have anything and experience that life, than to go back into my former life and have all of that. So that awareness actually caused this shift. Now we put on the second expo, as I said, cost $30,000. I didn't have it. And we had about 70 or 80 people show up. We rented a room that seated 1,200. So, I have those moments, yes. And so this is our second expo. And now the expo This is how life works out when you align with your potential. The first expo should have never happened. The second one certainly shouldn't have happened. Third one shouldn't have happened. Now, the second one, I rented a hotel in a suburb, which is the only one we've done not in Detroit. And, well, the hotel forgot to charge me for the rental, which is strange because they always charge you before you do the event. Well, they didn't charge me by accident. And so the event came and went, and I thought, no problem, people are going to come and I'll be able to pay for it. Well, people didn't come, and I couldn't pay for it. So now I had this $30,000 bill from the hotel that I had no money to pay because I couldn't buy groceries. And I still did the third expo. But what happened was the hotel went out of business. They went bankrupt. Yeah. Right. So this is what happens if you get on track with the path that you came here to live, and you move with intention, and you keep persevering in the direction that you know you're supposed to go. If it is the right path for you, the universe will always align, will always support your path. It may not support it in the way that you want. You know, in the early years of our expos, I used to have Michaela channel for me, and I'd ask the guides, so am I going to make enough money at this expo to pay for the bills? And they would say, very diplomatically, the expo will happen. And I learned nothing from that, so the next year I asked the same question. Will I make enough money to pay the bills for the expo? The expo will happen. And it did happen. And I never made enough money to pay them. But over the years, because things have grown, I now make enough to pay for the event anyway. So this is how my journey has been. And certainly there are lots of other bumps and things, but you know, we're getting out of time here. But I just want to convey to you that if you get on track with your path and you move fearlessly in that direction, the universe will always support you. The only time it won't is when you're not on track, and then it'll nudge you in the right direction, and that's where people fail at things, is because they're not on the right path. But if you're on the right path, you'll always have the support in whatever way that support needs to come to you. So I think we're out of time. You have 1 minute left. So I don't think we have any time for questions. Oh, we're out of time, right? Okay, well, if anybody has questions, step up to the mic. If not, we'll conclude. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I hope you found something of value in this. Thank you.